Netflix.
Netflix leads the pack.
Orange is the new black!
Netflix didn't get worse. It stopped needing to be better. What people interpret as decline is not collapse. It is completion. The discomfort surrounding Netflix today comes from a false diagnosis. Viewers assume something failed because the experience no longer feels rewarding. They assume quality eroded because attachment weakened. They assume creative standards fell because fewer shows feel memorable. Those assumptions rely on a belief that Netflix is still trying to win attention the way it once did. It is not. Netflix no longer operates in a competitive discovery phase. It operates in a stabilized retention phase. The difference between those two states explains almost every complaint without requiring incompetence, cultural decay, or creative failure. The platform still functions. Subscriptions persist. Usage remains consistent. Revenue remains stable. Systems that are failing do not behave this way. When Netflix was expanding, dissatisfaction was dangerous. Confusion was costly. Friction risked cancellation. Every release needed to justify its existence because growth depended on excitement. Attention had to be earned repeatedly. Discovery was the engine. That condition ended. Once Netflix reached saturation, the objective changed. Growth slowed. New users became harder to acquire. Churn became the primary risk. At that point, the platform no longer needed to surprise. It needed to normalize. Normalization changes output. Audiences are conditioned to believe boredom signals failure. When something feels flat, repetitive, or interchangeable, the instinct is to assume standards dropped. That instinct comes from older media models where stagnation preceded decline. Platforms do not follow that pattern. They do not decay the way products decay. They compress. Netflix did not lose its ability to produce compelling content. It lost the structural incentive to prioritize it. That distinction matters because it explains why dissatisfaction can rise while performance metrics remain intact. Viewers confuse emotional disengagement with operational distress. Netflix experiences neither. The system no longer requires emotional attachment to remain viable. It requires continued enrollment. Enrollment is far easier to maintain than enthusiasm. This is why criticism feels ignored. It is not dismissed. It is deprioritized. Complaints that do not result in mass cancellation do not register as signals. They register as tolerable noise. That indifference feels personal to users. It is structural to the platform. The most common explanation for Netflix's perceived decline focuses on content quality. Too many shows. Too few standouts. Algorithms favoring volume over vision. These explanations feel intuitive because they match the viewer's experience. They do not explain the system's behavior. If quality were the core issue, instability would follow. Subscriber volatility would increase, revenue would fracture, investor confidence would erode. None of that occurred. Netflix did not weaken, it recalibrated. What audiences experience as sameness is not creative exhaustion, it is risk compression. Content that is familiar, repeatable, and broadly acceptable performs better at scale than content that polarizes or demands attention. Emotional peaks introduce volatility. Flat engagement produces reliability. Reliability is rewarded. This is why Netflix content increasingly feels interchangeable. Distinction introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty threatens predictability. Predictability protects margins. The platform did not misunderstand culture, it deprioritized it. Cultural impact is expensive, it is noisy, it produces uneven outcomes. During growth, those risks were acceptable because breakout successes fueled expansion. Once expansion slowed, those same risks became liabilities. The optimization target shifted. Netflix stopped optimizing for memorability and began optimizing for completion. Shows did not need to be loved. They needed to be finished. Episodes did not need to linger. They needed to fill time without friction. This changes the texture of the experience. Stories become units of engagement rather than cultural moments. Series become interchangeable formats rather than identities. Content is designed to be consumed without demanding reflection. This is why viewers feel something missing without being able to name what broke. Nothing broke. The criteria changed. Platforms rarely announce this transition. There is no message explaining that creativity will be compressed or that risk tolerance has declined. The shift appears indirectly through repetition, tonal flattening, and algorithmic sameness. Audiences feel the change before they understand it. What people label as bad Netflix shows are not mistakes. They are optimized outputs for a system that no longer benefits from distinction. Memorability is not a requirement. Retention is. That is why the experience feels hollow without being Dysfunctional. Netflix did not abandon storytelling, it reclassified it. Once this is understood, the narrative of decline dissolves. Netflix did not lose its edge. It reached a stage where edge no longer mattered. The platform did not get worse. It became efficient in a way that no longer needs to impress. That realization reframes everything that follows. Netflix was not originally built to dominate culture. It was built to remove friction. The early Netflix model was not centered on prestige, taste, or artistic ambition. It was centered on solving a logistical problem. Physical media limited choice. Late fees punished engagement. Availability constrained demand. Netflix existed to dissolve those constraints quietly. The transition from DVDs to streaming did not change that objective, it accelerated it. Streaming removed waiting, reduced scarcity, and normalized instant access. At that stage, Netflix's primary advantage was not content quality, it was convenience combined with breadth. That configuration required novelty. Early streaming success depended on convincing users that the platform was worth opening repeatedly. Discovery mattered because attention was fragile. Users had alternatives. Habits had not yet formed. Switching costs were low. In that environment, Netflix tolerated inefficiency. It tolerated risk. It tolerated failure. Content did not need to be predictable. It needed to be interesting enough to justify continued exploration. Shows could be polarizing. Films could miss. Originals could fail quietly as long as the catalog felt alive. This was not creative generosity. It was structural necessity. When platforms are growing, they must overproduce possibility. They need occasional breakout successes to anchor perception. One standout show justifies dozens of experiments. Cultural impact substitutes for scale until scale exists. Netflix optimized for discovery because discovery drove expansion. During this phase, Netflix absorbed losses. Internally, production budgets fluctuated. Marketing amplified risk. Creative autonomy was tolerated because differentiation mattered more than efficiency. Each hit extended the platform's legitimacy. The system needed culture to grow. At this stage, Netflix did not need content to be consistent. It needed content to be surprising often enough to reward exploration. Variability was a feature, not a flaw. It signaled vitality. This is why early Netflix felt unpredictable, not better, unstable. That instability created excitement. Viewers felt rewarded for browsing. Algorithms surfaced oddities. Originals felt distinctive because they did not yet conform to a unified template. But this configuration only functions during expansion. As the user base grows, discovery loses marginal value. The number of new viewers declines. The catalog becomes familiar. The platform no longer benefits from constant experimentation because most users are no longer exploring, they are maintaining. Maintenance favors different outputs. The early Netflix model relied on tolerance for loss because growth offset inefficiency. When growth slows, loss becomes visible. What was once acceptable noise becomes measurable drag. At that point, culture stops being an asset and becomes a cost center. Creative unpredictability introduces variance. Variance complicates forecasting. Forecasting matters once revenue stabilizes. When expectations are fixed, deviation becomes dangerous. Netflix did not abandon creativity because it misunderstood it. It abandoned open-ended creativity because it could no longer justify it structurally. The original Netflix ecosystem rewarded attention spikes. A single breakout could drive millions of new subscriptions. Cultural conversation mattered because it extended reach. That logic collapses once saturation is reached. When most potential users are already enrolled, attention spikes no longer translate into proportional growth. Cultural relevance becomes decoupled from revenue expansion. At that point, novelty becomes inefficient. Netflix's early willingness to fund risk was contingent on asymmetry. Upside vastly outweighed downside. As the platform matured, that asymmetry narrowed. Upside flattened, downside persisted. That imbalance forced recalibration. This is why the early Netflix era cannot be replicated. It was not a golden age driven by taste. It was a growth phase driven by necessity. The system did exactly what it needed to do at that time. It built scale through tolerance. It built habit through variety. It built legitimacy through occasional cultural impact. Once those objectives were satisfied, the logic supporting them disappeared. Netflix did not outgrow creativity. It outgrew the need to rely on it. The original model required discovery because users had not yet committed. The modern model assumes commitment. Commitment changes everything. When users are committed, friction must be minimized. Surprises introduce friction. Memorability is unnecessary. Familiarity becomes efficient. This is why early Netflix felt expansive. and modern Netflix feels narrow. The platform is no longer designed to be explored, it is designed to be inhabited. Habit replaced excitement. That transition marks the end of the original function. Netflix was never meant to remain culturally adventurous indefinitely. That would imply perpetual expansion. No platform sustains that state. Growth phases end, systems harden. Once Netflix completed its original task, establishing streaming as default, it no longer needed to justify itself creatively. It needed to justify itself financially. That requirement reshaped everything that followed. The shift did not begin with a creative decision. It began with a ceiling. Every platform eventually reaches a point where expansion slows, not because demand disappears, but because saturation is reached. Netflix encountered that ceiling quietly. Most households that wanted streaming already had it. Growth became incremental rather than explosive. Incremental growth changes incentives. When expansion is rapid, variance is tolerated. When expansion slows, variance becomes risk. Predictability replaces ambition because predictability protects expectations. At this stage, Netflix's primary audience was no longer potential subscribers. It was capital markets. Public companies do not optimize for excitement. They optimize for stability. Once growth rates normalize, volatility becomes the enemy. Analysts do not reward surprise. They reward consistency. This is where optimization changes direction. Creative risk introduces uneven performance. Some content overperforms. Some underperforms. That dispersion complicates forecasting. Forecasting matters once revenue becomes the primary justification for valuation. Netflix did not face pressure to be better. It faced pressure to be reliable. Reliability requires compression. Risk had to be narrowed. Outcomes had to cluster. Variance had to be reduced. That does not mean eliminating failure entirely. It means bounding it. The easiest way to bound outcomes is to rely on precedent. Formats that have already worked reduce uncertainty. Genres with predictable engagement lower downside risk. Familiar structures stabilize completion rates. This is when creativity becomes subordinate to modeling. Content decisions stopped being guided primarily by cultural potential and began being guided by probability distributions. The question shifted from "could this matter?" to "will this perform within acceptable bounds?" That change is subtle, but it is permanent. Once Wall Street expectations anchor around steady margins and predictable churn, platforms lose flexibility. Deviating from that expectation introduces punishment. Stock prices absorb disappointment faster than they reward novelty. Netflix adapted accordingly. The system identified that memorability was not required for retention. Habit was sufficient. Users did not need to love content. They needed to keep watching something. This insight changed everything. If engagement can be maintained without emotional attachment, then emotional attachment becomes inefficient. Deep loyalty creates expectations. Expectations constrain future decisions. Shallow engagement is easier to sustain at scale. This is why good enough beats memorable in mature systems. Memorable content introduces spikes. Spikes attract attention, but they also raise benchmarks. Each success resets expectations upward. That is dangerous when growth is capped. Predictable content maintains equilibrium. Netflix began optimizing for completion rates rather than conversation, for consistency rather than impact, for smooth consumption rather than cultural imprint. Risk became the enemy not because Netflix feared failure, but because failure became visible. In the growth phase, failure was hidden by expansion. In the mature phase, failure showed up in margins. That exposure forced discipline. Budgets tightened. Formats standardized. Global templates replaced local experimentation. Content needed to work everywhere reasonably well rather than somewhere exceptionally. Exceptional performance in one market does not offset underperformance globally. Average performance everywhere does. This is why Netflix content began to feel flatter, not because talent declined, but because the acceptable range narrowed. Creativity was not eliminated, it was constrained. The system no longer needed breakthroughs, it needed throughput. Once subscriber numbers stabilized, Netflix's primary challenge became churn management. Retaining users requires continuity, not surprise. Surprises cause friction. Familiarity reduces decision cost. Decision cost is invisible but decisive. Users open Netflix tired, distracted, and habitual. The platform that asks less of them wins. Content that blends together reduces exit risk. This is not a failure of imagination. It is a success of optimization. The inflection point was not a moment. It was a threshold. Once crossed, the platform could not return to its prior logic without reintroducing risk it no longer needed. At that point, creativity stopped being an engine and became a variable to be managed. Netflix did not decline, it recalibrated. What followed was not decay, it was consolidation. And consolidation produces a specific kind of output, stable, interchangeable, and forgettable, because those qualities are not flaws in mature systems. They are safeguards. Once predictability became the primary objective, Netflix's internal logic reorganized around systems rather than stories. Content was no longer evaluated primarily as art, or even as individual products. It was evaluated as inventory. Inventory must move. To ensure movement, Netflix leaned into algorithmic commissioning. This did not mean algorithms wrote scripts. It meant algorithms constrained decisions, historical engagement data narrowed, the acceptable range of genres, runtimes, pacing, and tone. Projects that fit known engagement curves advanced. Projects that deviated required exceptional justification. Over time, exceptional justification became rare. Formats that demonstrated reliable completion rates were replicated. Structure stabilized because structure reduces uncertainty. Episode lengths clustered. Narrative arcs flattened. Emotional peaks were moderated to avoid drop-off. This was not creative stagnation. It was variance control. Global templates became central to this process. Content needed to function across regions without friction. Cultural specificity introduces volatility. Universality smooths performance. Stories became abstracted from place, context, and consequence. Characters existed to maintain engagement, not to linger. This is why so much content began to feel interchangeable. Interchangeability is not accidental. It is a feature of systems optimized for continuity rather than impact. Netflix did not need viewers to remember what they watched. It needed them to keep watching. This distinction matters. Attachment creates loyalty, but loyalty introduces demands. Demands increase risk. Passive engagement is quieter. Quieter engagement is easier to maintain at scale. As a result, Netflix optimized for flow rather than fixation. One show did not need to be exceptional as long as it led seamlessly into the next. The platform itself became the product. Individual titles became interchangeable components inside a larger consumption loop. This is why cancellation accelerated. Long-running narratives create expectation debt. Viewers begin to anticipate resolution. Resolution introduces finality. Finality increases churn risk. Ending stories is riskier than beginning new ones. From a system perspective, unfinished narratives are safer than completed ones. Cancellation was not punishment. It was risk management. Shorter commitments reduced exposure. Limited series formats constrained cost and expectation. Renewal decisions became actuarial rather than emotional. What mattered was not whether a show was loved. What mattered was whether it performed within acceptable engagement bounds. This is why engagement no longer correlates with cultural relevance. Engagement measures time spent. Cultural relevance measures memory. Memory is unnecessary for retention. Habit is sufficient. Netflix optimized for habit. Algorithmic surfaces reinforced this. Recommendations did not prioritize novelty. They prioritized continuity. Viewers were guided toward familiar structures with slight variation, enough difference to feel new, enough sameness to feel safe. This balance reduces friction. Friction causes exits. Exits threaten metrics. Over time, this created a library that feels expansive but shallow, abundant but indistinct, always available but rarely missed. This is not accidental decay, it is structural maturity. Mature systems favor reliability over resonance. Resonance introduces spikes. Spikes attract attention but destabilize baselines. Netflix did not want spikes, it wanted smoothness. Smoothness protects forecasts. Forecasts protect valuation. Valuation protects leadership continuity. Once these priorities align, reversal becomes impossible. The platform cannot return to its earlier creative posture without reintroducing volatility that the system has already optimized away. Nostalgia for the early era misunderstands its function. That phase existed to acquire users, not to sustain equilibrium. Equilibrium is quieter. What feels like blandness is actually compression. The range of acceptable outcomes narrowed until most content clustered around the median. Median content does not offend. It does not inspire. It persists. This persistence is success under the new model. Netflix does not need viewers to care deeply. It needs them to remain enrolled. Enrollment is sustained through availability, not attachment. Once this logic locked in, content quality became secondary to content reliability. The platform stopped asking whether something would matter. It asked whether it would perform. And performance no longer meant cultural impact. It meant watch time. This pattern is not unique to Netflix. It appears wherever platforms transition from growth to maintenance. Spotify did not degrade its recommendations because taste changed. It narrowed them because predictability outperforms discovery once scale is achieved. Music became mood infrastructure rather than cultural exploration. Playlists replaced artists because playlists are stable. They do not demand attention. They do not age. They do not create expectation debt. Amazon did not dilute its marketplace accidentally. It optimized for throughput. Product quality became secondary to fulfillment reliability. Brand meaning dissolved because meaning slows transactions. Interchangeability accelerated volume. Disney did not abandon storytelling discipline. It standardized it. Franchises replaced films because franchises reduce uncertainty. Familiar intellectual property compresses risk. Emotional attachment is tolerated only when it aligns with predictable returns. YouTube followed the same trajectory. Early creators mattered. Individual voices defined eras. Over time, format consistency outperformed originality. Upload schedules beat experimentation. Thumbnails converged. Titles flattened. Watch time curves governed creative decisions. Across platforms, the same rule applied. Once user growth plateaued, affection stopped mattering. Platforms do not decay when they mature, they harden. Hardening does not look like collapse. It looks like repetition. It looks like sameness. It feels like boredom. Boredom is not a failure state. Boredom is stability. Bored users are predictable users. Predictable users generate reliable revenue. Reliable revenue sustains valuation. Valuation sustains the platform. This is why dissatisfaction does not trigger correction. People complain, but they remain. They remain because friction is low. Cancellation is effortful. Alternatives are similar. Switching costs exist even when prices are equal. Attachment is unnecessary once dependency is established. Infrastructure does not need to be loved. It needs to be tolerated. Once platforms reach this stage, their primary risk is volatility, not discontent. Emotional spikes introduce unpredictability. Predictability protects the system. This is why innovation slows after dominance. Not because capability disappears, but because incentive shifts. Systems that serve millions optimize for the median experience. Median experiences are not memorable, they are durable. Netflix fits this pattern precisely. What appears to be creative decline is actually platform consolidation. What feels like cultural erosion is structural optimization. The system no longer competes for attention, it manages retention. Management is quieter than competition. This is why platforms stop trying to impress. Impressing is expensive. Sustaining is cheaper. Once this phase begins, reversal is rare. Platforms do not willingly reintroduce instability once it has been removed. The cost is too high. The upside is unnecessary. Netflix did not fail to notice boredom. It accepted it. Netflix still works. Streams load, recommendations populate. New content appears on schedule. Subscribers remain, revenue flows, margins stabilize. Share price responds to predictability. Nothing is broken. What changed is the role the platform plays in the viewer's life. Netflix no longer needs to be a destination. It needs to be present. It needs to reduce friction, not create meaning. It needs to fill time, not define culture. This is why engagement metrics remain strong even as detachment fades. People watch without caring. They browse without curiosity. They finish episodes without anticipation. The platform functions because functioning no longer requires affection. This is the quiet trade-off. In exchange for reliability, volatility was removed. In exchange for scale, uniqueness was compressed. In exchange for predictability, memorability was sacrificed. From the system's perspective, this is not loss. It is resolution. Netflix no longer competes for identity. It provides utility. It occupies attention without demanding commitment. It stabilizes usage without provoking emotion. Disengagement is not a threat when exit is unlikely. Users stay because leaving offers no meaningful upgrade. Other platforms operate under the same constraints. Content differs, structure does not. This is why dissatisfaction feels inert. There is no outrage because nothing feels taken. There is no excitement because nothing feels offered. Only continuation remains. This outcome is optimal for the platform. Predictable usage supports predictable revenue. Predictable revenue supports predictable valuation. Predictable valuation satisfies the market. Cultural relevance is volatile. Stability is not. Netflix chose stability. Not because it could not do more, because it no longer needed to. What viewers experience as decline is simply the absence of novelty. Once novelty is no longer required, the platform did not betray its audience. It outgrew the need to impress them. Netflix didn't get worse, it finished optimizing.